Hi, I'm Dr. Calvin Mackie, and welcome to my podcast, Let's Talk STEM. In 2013, I decided to start a nonprofit organization called STEM Nola, and that was my introduction to the world of philanthropy. And I thought I would go out, I would have these great ideas, I would present them to philanthropic organizations, they would give me funding, and I would be able to go and serve my community. But what I didn't realize was that many philanthropic organizations just didn't operate like that. So my wife and I put up $100,000 of our own money to get our philanthropic organization off the ground. In the last 9 years, we've engaged over 100,000 young people, K-12 students in STEM hands-on education, and we've engaged over 20,000 families. And research has shown that organizations led by Black and Latino leaders are well underfunded as compared to those led by their white counterparts. In the philanthropic world, we have to somehow reconcile this issue of language, this issue of trust, and this issue of belief. As a PhD in engineering, I have seen how I go and I speak to funders, and they really question whether or not I understand what it'll take to educate a kid in STEM. Something is really wrong when I have 4 STEM degrees. I was a college professor for 12 years, and someone sitting across from me have the power to actually question whether or not I know about STEM education. And if that is happening to me, the real question is, what's happening to other people without that type of pedigree or without that type of experience? So today I'm excited about the conversation we're having with Frank Gettridge, the CEO and president of the National Public Education Support Fund.
From the STEM Global Action Studios in New Orleans, this is the Let's Talk STEM with Dr. Calvin Mackie podcast. STEM Global Action is a national leader in creating STEM-based learning activities and delivering them virtually and in communities around the globe.
Hello and welcome back to Let's Talk STEM. I'm Ken Sang, your moderator. Today we've got a really interesting show set up for you. But before we get started, as always, let's say hello to our host, Dr. Calvin Mackie. Hello, Dr. Mackie.
Hello, Ken. Hey, Ken, he's one of these shows I'm really excited about, man. I mean, we're going to have Dr. Frank Gettridge on here, a native New Orleanian. I went to Morehouse, he went to Morris Brown. I mean, 2 young men from the city of New Orleans with PhDs out here on the battlefield fighting for equality and education in STEM. It doesn't get any better than this. So, Ken, let's go.
All right. Well, welcome, Frank. Welcome to the show. Frank, tell us who you are and what you've done in your career and how you got to where you are today.
Dr. Mackie just gave you some of that info, and I want to thank you for allowing me to be on the show today. I'm excited as well for the same reasons, growing up in New Orleans. So who I am, I can tell you I'm New Orleans, if you ask me who I am. The only difference is I have that EDD, Dr. Mackie have that PhD. So we want to draw that. But my story, I think, is growing up in New Orleans, always caring about the neighborhood and the community. And always being close to my culture and close with my family, having a real tight-knit family. I understood right away that education was important. And so that kind of carried me through my mom, my dad, grandmother, grandfather, and my 2 brothers. Going to Morris Brown did a lot to ground me in who I was as a Black man and being in Atlanta during that time. But what's unique about me is all of my background is education. I was a preschool teacher. I was a principal in Chicago. First grade teacher when I was in Georgia, Head Start director. So I have all of these experiences in education. I also had some policy experiences, which sort of changed my trajectory around what part of education I wanted to put myself into, which is how I got here now at NPESF. One of the things I figured out in the policy arena was that there was a lot of well-intended folks making decisions about communities that look like mine, but there wasn't any representation of people in the room who look like the people who I grew up with in my community. And so a need to have that voice and to have that perspective in the policy space is one of the things that I started focusing on. So now at NPESF, which is the National Public Education Support Fund, we support philanthropic networks to solve issues around education, issues that focus on equity, issues that focus on justice, and issues that just focus on improving learning for all students. We care about anything from youth to policy to equitable data, you name it. If funders are coming together to try to figure out what's collaborative ways that we can solve some of these layered issues, we support that process. And we convene them, more importantly, with policymakers. And so we want the policymakers to understand how those policies are playing out at the ground level. And we want to bring those voices of the people who are being impacted into the room so that they can hear their real life experiences and hopefully make some changes.
So just one clarification, Frank, when you say policy and policymakers, you're talking about laws, rules, funding methods, who gets paid, who doesn't, where does federal dollars go? That's the kind of thing you mean. And policymakers are elected officials, whether it's your mayor, your city councilman, your congressman, or the president of the United States. Right.
We've had meetings with almost all of the secretaries of education have been in the room. Congressmen and women we've had conversations with, legislators we've had conversations with, and then we also want to bring in experts, and so we'll bring in superintendents. We know we have an issue right now around the teaching profession and the teacher shortage, so we bring in teachers, because you may hear one thing from in a policy room as to what the issues are, but then if you talk to a teacher in the classroom, they're bringing in another perspective. We brought in parents during the pandemic so that we can really hear. It's one thing to say kids are suffering from mental health challenges, but then to also hear that the parents are having those same struggles. It's just not a situation that's siloed. It's the child's problem. It's also the parents' problem and the school's problem. And how can we work with the community to solve that problem collectively?
Great. Let's hear from Dr. Mackie.
Frank, that's very interesting. The work that you have done and the work that you all are doing now. We're on the backside, hopefully, of this thing, the pandemic and the coronavirus. But 2 years ago, we was in the coronavirus. We had the George Floyd. We had racial reconciliation going on, and all of that really laid bare the inequalities, in not only in education but the structural inequalities in our society. For the last 2 years, I'm quite sure you all have been addressing that. And a part of those structural inequalities have given rise to this teacher loss. A lot of teachers are saying this isn't for me. Based on your experience, as a student, as a teacher, now as a policymaker, how would you speak to that for parents to let them know, or the general society to let them know exactly what is going on today?
I think in talking to parents, I think what I would say to them is that these are historical issues. These are not new issues. And these are issues it's not going to be one person or one organization to fix it. It's going to take a collaborative effort. I would also say that these are issues that are not siloed. So there's no silver bullet to these issues. I think it's community by community. Like they say, all politics is local politics. I think all strategies are also community-led strategies. And so when we were working with the parents, we want them to be involved. When I was at the Kellogg Foundation, the one thing we used to say is that the people closest to the problem have the solution. They just need the support. And so what we try to do at NPESF is to support these philanthropic networks, support philanthropy as a whole, to figure out how do we support these communities so that they can think freely and not have to worry about where the dollars are coming from. How can we leverage the federal dollars so that we can direct them towards these communities? Or sometimes it's a lack of information is what I found. And so communities might not even know that there's a grant opportunity available. And so how do we create lines of communication so that they understand when these opportunities become available, we have the support system set up so that they can then go and apply for those dollars?
Hey, you made an excellent point there, and I'm glad you centered the community, because when we founded STEM Nola in 2013, nearly 9 years ago, that's what we did in STEM, right? And I think we believe that's one of the big things missing in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics education. Whenever I talk to my colleagues in STEM education, everybody want to start at the schoolhouse door. They want to do things in the schools. They want to, have robotics teams. They want to do this. They want to have math competitions. And I say, how are we going to sell something to the community and they don't even know what it is? How do we speak to the community in such a way about STEM that they can digest it and understand that this is what our kids need to be doing in the 21st century, and then see a pathway to get their kids there? As a matter of fact, we are still challenged with a lot of philanthropic organizations in STEM in understanding that, because a lot of times, many of the people in STEM, it didn't come from those neighborhoods and communities that we came from. So they have a challenge in even believing that kids who are coming out of despair can get to hope and achieve in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics.
Yeah, and I would say to that, I think to your point about a lot of kids in STEM, they don't come from the neighborhoods we come from. I think one of the challenges, at least from a philanthropic side, and even when you talked about all of the issues around the racial uprising and the issues with the pandemic, is that you have in philanthropy, there's a knowledge gap, there's a language gap oftentimes in philanthropy. And when I say in philanthropy, between philanthropy and a grantee.
Yes.
And so I learned that when I came into philanthropy from being in the classroom for over 20 years. And so when I got there, it was an adjustment for me as to how I spoke about the work. And so it was a translation that I had to learn, and that I supported other grantees around to sort of try to get them into that space. And so this idea of a language disconnect, there's a disconnect around relationships. I think when you talk about Black-led organizations, I know after George Floyd, philanthropy turned its focus, even more of a focus, around supporting Black-led and BIPOC-led organizations. But that's because when you looked across the board, Black-led organizations oftentimes got the lowest investments from funders compared to white-led organizations. And so trying to explore those things, focus on that, knowing that they come with the right ideas as well, and they can contribute to the conversation is something that we try to support.
And I add to that, there's definitely a language gap. There's definitely a relationship gap, which that relationship gap lends itself to an access gap.
Yep.
But there's also a belief gap. And when I talk about the belief gap, is one, believing in the founder or believing in the executive director that they can execute what they're saying they're executing, but also the belief gap that the kids that we are servicing can achieve what it is that, that we want them to achieve. I keep saying, I say, look, we want to become almost like the AAU of STEM. We're going into communities and finding the genius in our community and giving them everything they need so they can become what they want to become. People believe and understand that in football. Colleges and funders will scour the earth because they believe there's talent for football and basketball in these communities. And they've created pathways and they've created a process to extract the talent out of those communities. That's what we are trying to do in STEM. And sometimes we run into a belief gap because I keep telling people, I got a PhD in engineering. If I listen to a lot of the funders that I talk to, I should be some type of technician working for some oil company because they want to track me into a trade rather than giving me the tools to become this PhD that I am today.
Right. And I think it's something you said, right? Like, you're very unique. Just 3% of engineers, since it was a study from 2019, just 3% of engineers are Black or Latino right now. So you're in that 3%. And if you probably look at the number of Black men that's in that, it probably gets even smaller. And so I think something you said is that when it comes to sports, there's a pathway. I went to school on a basketball scholarship when I went through Morris Brown. That's because I saw people that played basketball that looked like me. And I felt as I got older, like if I'm gonna get my school paid for, that's the way for me to go. I have the highest likelihood of success because that's where most people that look like me are situated. And that's what I can do. I think when it comes to STEM, we don't see that representation in STEM. We don't see that representation in a lot of fields. And even in color, you can talk about women, the challenges around women. I think just 15% of engineers are women. That was the same percentage that was 10 years ago. It's the same thing today, it hasn't shifted. And so if you don't see that representation, that messes with your belief system as to whether or not you can be successful. It's no different than watching movies growing up. And how many movies you would see a Black president? And you didn't see it because the first time you saw a Black president, you reacted. You was like, oh my God, they got a Black president. Oh, I never saw it. And so it's like, but it increases your level of belief that space is for me and I want to be there. And so what's the pathway for STEM that needs to be created? One of the solutions and strategies is to bring more people of color into those roles, such as yourself. And how can universities think about it? How can jobs and HR departments think about recruiting more people in STEM that are Black and brown, that are women, so that people who look like them can know that that's a place that they can feel safe and have success in.
And that's what we're doing at STEM Nola, right? In STEM Global Action. We are taking the human capital, the technical capital out of these institutions and marshaling them into the communities where kids can see, touch, and feel and believe in a possibility of becoming that. So thank you for validating that. And I just want to say, that's the whole purpose of this podcast, right? How do we bring these voices, these images to people who otherwise think they don't exist. You know, my wife know I'm a unicorn. That's why she married me, right? But Frank, to let you know, now you know I'm a unicorn.
So, Frank, let's talk about this. I want to let's talk about bridging this gap. You both just very eloquently talked about challenges in both of your fields, whether it's in philanthropy, education, or particularly STEM education. So, Frank, you work in philanthropy. This is Black Philanthropy Month. Let's talk about your field of philanthropy, let's talk about the representation within the world of philanthropy so that Dr. Mackie is no longer a unicorn, so that people understand that there are people out there. And how do you adjust to the cultural norms that he works in within the field of philanthropy?
I think in that sense, so, and I was looking at the data, so like 82% of BIPOC-led organizations receive funding from philanthropy compared to 86% of white-led organizations. But now what's not highlighted in that is the amount that's invested, because oftentimes that 82% also get lower amounts of investment compared to white-led organizations. And there's research that even looks at the qualifications of the leaders, the various leaders of color, as it sort of extrapolates that. So I would say from the point of networking, that's why I'm here. Like, I want people in this space that's like me. I can say that philanthropy has taken a more explicit shift to try to address these issues, as talking about the call to action to support more BIPOC-led organizations. And yes, it came after the George Floyd situation. But, as they say in DC, always take advantage of a good crisis. I never let a good crisis go to waste. And so how can we find these opportunities to start to lift up the importance and value of Black and brown people? I think the other piece is having us in those spaces so that we can begin to network. And so Dr. Mackie and I met at the STEM conference, found out we were from New Orleans. And so now I have a new network back at home in New Orleans that's focusing on STEM. He has a new network here in DC that's focusing on policy and philanthropy. And so how do I give him access to this part of the space? We talked about access earlier, and I think that's a big piece of it. Philanthropy has made, and this is my own observable eye, they have made more of an effort. I've seen more people of color becoming program officers and coming into foundations, because we work with over 50 foundations, both national and local and regional foundations. And I've seen more program officers of color coming into these spaces. And so that means that there should be more people of color by default that should have access to these spaces, and they should build out those networks to have that different perspective and that different voice in the room.
So, Frank, in the field of education, how important is it that more Black and brown parents and family members understand the importance of STEM education, and the career path that it can bring, as well as the intangibles that come from STEM education?
So you know what, when you think about STEM education, what parents should understand is that STEM education, and it may be cliche, but it's preparing your child for life. Because the issues and the challenges that STEM deal with, they're not going anywhere. You're talking about issues of healthcare. You're talking about issues of water. We're having a water crisis now because of the heat wave. And so you're talking about these issues that impact in kids' communities. Dr. Mackie even raised, and I didn't think about this when I heard his presentation, New Orleans is full of hurricanes. So why can't you build a STEM program around studying hurricanes? Children would care about that. They will be motivated to do it because it's in their community. And I think STEM covers when kids are learning. We always talking about relevance and rigor, but I always think there's an academic side to learning. There has to be a cultural side to learning, meaning how does it impact me as a Black man? Can I connect with that? Do people in the book look like me? And I also think there has to be a social side. How is that impacting my community? How is that impacting my state? I think you bring those three things together, and I think STEM does that, and it makes it relevant and it makes it engaging. And it provides a career pathway, because then you connect with employers, and our kids know where they're going to be. They can project where they're going to be in 20 years. Dr. Mackie will tell you, many of our kids in our community, is a community I grew up in, New Orleans, Ninth Ward, some kids couldn't tell you where they was going to be in 20 years. I even argued when I was in Atlanta, and I was working in public schools and working in the Head Start program. And in Chicago, when I was a principal, some kids that you hear they're saying, kids, they just don't have hope. Like, that's real. To not know where you're going to be in 10 years, for your parents to not know, or your uncles or your aunts, to not be able to look at you outside of saying that boy going to be a basketball player. And then what if he break his leg? What's next? To not have that in your mind, to understand what's next, that's scary. And that makes you do unconscionable things sometimes. Yeah. And so how do you give people that hope? How do you show people where they are 10 years from now? Something to build toward.
Frank, and that's why I wanted to have you on Let's Talk STEM, because that's one of the major challenges, definitely in STEM, but definitely in education, right? I mean, to get to achievement, we say you got to go down a street called hope. Well, most people start in despair. They go down a street called hope and they get to achievement. A lot of people in education assume that the kids coming to the schoolhouse door are already hopeful. And if we give them some technologies, a Promethean board, a new bus, that'll get them to achievement. But you and I know most kids are coming to the schoolhouse door in despair. So how do we get them from despair to hope? That's a hard thing. And then from hope to success, that's a head thing. And what is missing is this hope piece. And that is what we do at STEM Nola, right? The model that we've built, we believe that STEM should be culturally and environmentally relevant. It should be intentional and consistent, because we have to increase the literacy of the entire family about the possibilities. And I hate to use the word STEM because STEM is a trade word. You know, we have to increase the literacy of the possibilities of tomorrow for everybody. Right. So when parents come out and they see their little daughter dissecting a sheep heart with this Black woman surgeon, I mean, literally we've seen parents cry because what the parent is saying is a possibility for their child. Now, the challenge there is that, how do you measure that? That's what a lot of funders and philanthropists, that's what they don't get, because they want this data, right? They want a data to say we took 100 kids and we did something with them, and now 98% doing this. And we're saying this. We say in our communities, everybody make sure that every Black and brown boy touches a football or basketball before the age of 4, and no one questions that. There's no metric, there's no evaluation, but they make sure that there's a park, there's a basketball goal, there's a football field, and everybody touch a football and a basketball. What we're trying to do is make sure that every kid touches STEM before the age of 4, you know, such that it become a part of their lexicon, become a part of their DNA. It just become natural for them to have this command of the language and the knowledge, such that when they do get to the schoolhouse door, they have that hope and a possibility that if I do this, like me and you, right? I was a basketball player, all sitting in New Orleans, and they made me believe that if I do this, in 12 years, I'll get this thing called a scholarship. We want our kids believing in kindergarten, if I do this in 12 years, you know, I'm going to have an option to go somewhere and be in a situation to change the world. Yeah, I mean,
I think you said it right. I think it's two things. You're right. That's one of the challenges, right? When we talked about the language barrier with philanthropy, between philanthropy and grantees, I think one of the challenges is measurement and how do you capture it. But I also think, and it takes me back to when I was a principal and I went through the 50 school closings in Chicago. My parents and my school was on the list to close, right? But we had all of these gains. Enrollment went from 400 to like 700 kids. Scores went up. Everything, the discipline and suspension rates was lower than that of the school district. But when we went, we didn't understand why we went on the list. But when the parents went to the board, the initial argument was, we can't close this school. I love this school. The neighborhoods are dangerous. And I said to the parents, that's not their language.
That's right.
They don't care that you love this school. They don't care that the neighborhood is dangerous. What you have to say is, why are you closing this school? Reading scores have gone up from here to here. Behavior rates have went from this percentage to that percentage. And so you have to talk that language. I'm saying the language of accountability, or the language of statistics or data, whatever you want to call it. You have to be able to translate. And I think that's been a challenge between grantees and between philanthropy, is how do you measure? I would also add quickly is that narratives are strong. Narratives are strong. And I think, how do you lift up those kids? It's strong for philanthropy to see that. It's strong for a parent to see a child that came from the same community as theirs, that looked like theirs. The danger with racism in America and I'm not calling people racist. I want to say that because I know the political environment we're in. But the danger with systemic racism is that it's not physical, it's psychological. So it makes us put people in certain categories. You don't believe that a person that looks like you can have a PhD in engineering. And when they see you, it's like somewhat of amazement. Like, where did he come from? You know, people look at me, they don't believe that I might have a doctor, a EDD from USC. And they look at, oh my God, you went to, how did that happen? Oh, did you went to
When I met you, I didn't believe it. I was like, man, you can't show me something.
Yeah, you know, right, you know, and like you struggle, right? Because when you're Black, you like, do I walk in the room and throw this degree around? You know, like, no, I just want to be me. Like, because I want other kids that grew up in neighborhoods I grew up in to know that you can have a doctorate degree and you don't have to alter who you fundamentally are as a person. You don't have to alter who you talk to, you know, and like, you can do that and you can still do this. And I want to be that example. And I think, how do you give people that example? But then how do you talk the language, as my mentor used to say, you know, the language of those up high while still connecting to the community? And how do we balance that?
And you're making a valid point. And that's why for 9 years, what we've been doing is that we've been collecting these stories, these narratives, right? Because it's very difficult to measure hope. You know, some things, everything that can be measured doesn't necessarily count, and everything that can be counted doesn't necessarily matter.
Yep.
And hope is one of those things where, like I tell funders all the time, when a kid tells me I saved their life, I tend to believe them. All right?
Mm-hmm.
I tend to believe them. So if we can capture these narratives, if we can capture these stories, if we can capture this success, moving kids from point A to point B, and kids and parents saying, but for, you know, but for. We just got two young ladies got full tuition scholarships to Texas A&M. One wants to be an engineer, one wants to be a doctor, $320,000 delivered to one family. And for the mom and the grandmother to say, but for STEM Nola, you know, how do my daughters desire to do this, but for STEM Nola? I mean, that's hope.
Yeah.
And we're playing up those stories so other people can get the hope. But sometimes, you know, that measurement piece is the one that we've been battling, because I keep saying, you know, they let Black boys play basketball for 3 hours. Nobody asks them if they're more likely to go to the NBA. Hell, they play basketball for 3 months and nobody asks them if they're more likely to go to the NBA. But we put a kid in a robotics class for 3 weeks and they really want me to ask a kid, are you more likely to be an engineer now? Yeah. Middle class kids get to wonder. It's wonderment, right? It's exposure. They just get to do things, and if they don't like it, they go to the next one. Yep. With low income, low resource kids, we give them stuff and we want them to attach to it and hold on to it forever. They don't get the privilege of wonderment.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's true. And we used to say that, you know, when the whole thing about testing, some of your high performing schools don't test, but your low performing schools got the most accountability laid on top of them. It's robotic. It's so ridiculous at times. They can't move because everything's, and I think that's the difference what you described. Middle class to upper class kids get to act without the accountability. They get to freely think without fear, you know, and we are always thinking about, even in these leadership positions, I got to catch myself at times as a CEO thinking out of fear, doing things that most of my white counterparts who are CEOs, they just do it without thinking. But I got to think about, are they going to think I'm doing something wrong? You know, if I'm out too late, if I spend this much money, like, you're constantly worried about being accused of something, because that's sort of how you grew up in this America. And so, like, having to shed that and work on that, I think it's something that, you know, the narrative can help change.
The narrative is very important. I tell a story about how I was meeting with a funder one day. And the funder said, you know, I said, I want to do this robotics camp. So the funder said, well, how much does it cost? I said, it's $350 per kid. And the funder said, well, why is it so expensive? I said, because it's the same price that you fund on that side of town. What make you think that it'd be any cheaper on this side of town? The only thing changed was the kids that I was delivering it to. And what that taught me right then and there, that was a value proposition in the eyes of the funder, right?
Yep.
Sometimes when you're dealing with low income, low resource kids, they want to give them less. And my point is, to my community here, and everybody know this who deal with me, we're going to give every kid, we're STEM for all, we're going to give every kid high quality, effective STEM. So I'm not going to buy $1,000, $3,000 3D printer. on that side of town, and then come over here with a $750 3D printer that break, after every print. And what the parents say about our program, and there's two things that they say. They say, one, thank you for being so professional, and two, thank you for being so organized. Every time they say that, it breaks my heart because I know where it's coming from.
Yep.
I know where it's coming from. It's coming from a mindset that they're used to getting less.
Yep.
And that's, Frank, that's what you're speaking to. And if anybody take anything from this entire talk, from a executive director and a practitioner and from a funder, those are things that everybody need to keep on the end of their nose and think about every day as funders and as practitioners.
Yeah.
If we're going to do for all, then everything got to be equal across the board. Right.
And I'll add, because I always like to draw it to all of the different issues, but like that idea of like they always feel like we have to get less. That's an issue in my mind of like that psychological racism or implicit bias. Because you could take even the issue about if we talk about STEM and career paths, the issue is around resumes. You could take a person with a white person with a resume with less experience, and the person would say, well, oh, they have good ideas. You get a black person with the exact same resume, and they'll say they don't have enough experience. And you ask that, why when it comes to us, you find every reason not to. But when it comes to somebody else, you find every reason to do it. That's the reason, to be honest with you. That's the reason I put myself in all the student debt and went and got my doctorate. Because I said to myself at some point, okay, I'm gonna get the highest degree that one can get. So now you don't have a reason to say you can't because he's not qualified enough. So now I got the highest degree you can get. So if the qualification is not the issue, then what's the issue? If the experience is not the issue, what's the issue? And you leave me to have to think about that based off of my experiences.
Hey, Frank, I was a professor at Tulane. In the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina, Tulane eliminated the engineering school. So as the first and only African-American ever tenured in the history of the College of Engineering at Tulane University, I lost a six-figure job. Now, that's supposed to be a job for life, right? And most people say the only way you lose tenure is by act of God. But guess what? God decided to act. Right. But when I walked out of Tulane door, I left a $2.5 million National Science Foundation grant at Tulane. So the 12 years I was at Tulane, I probably managed nearly $10 million. Now, I'll never forget, I was speaking at the Pew Charitable Trust one day about philanthropy. And I said, what blew my mind was that when I was at Tulane managing this $10 million, people were just giving me money. Now, when I walked out of Tulane and hung my shingle up and said, I want to start a nonprofit, nobody would give me money. They would say, you don't have the experience. You've never led an organization. And I said, I just managed. What? I just managed. No, the bottom line is that, see, they trusted Tulane.
Yep.
I got it confused. They never trusted me. They trusted Tulane. Now, I walked away thinking they trusted me, and they said, nah, we ain't giving you no money. So right now, STEM Nola, our budget probably is about $4 million a year. But my wife and I, we took $100,000 and started this nonprofit. And people say, why would you take your own money and start a nonprofit? I said, because some people get their ideas funded, and some people actually got to go out and do it before people believe in them and trust them and fund them. And that's the challenge that we are facing in education, especially STEM education, in terms of philanthropy and engaging communities.
And you know what? You just said something about the trust, that they trusted Tulane. Because the same happened when I was at a selective enrollment high school in Chicago as an assistant principal. I repeatedly got callbacks from the central office. But then when I went to a traditional neighborhood school, I was the same person. I got treated completely different because I think they didn't trust the school. The schools were different. And I think, to your point, we're one of the few populations of people that's taught that if you want to do well, you got to leave your community. And I think when you think about philanthropy, and we don't talk about this openly, but sometimes we have to catch our own biases. And because you're going into this Black community, as Native American or Hispanic community, you can't go and not trusting that community can get this work done.
That's right.
And so instead of giving them a lot, you give them a little just to see if they can prove to you they can get it done. Then you may promise more next time. But how do you shift that? And I think that's a lot of what we do at NPESF when we talk about our focus on equity. It's just not that we're trying to solve systemic issues. We're also helping people working through people issues. And how do we build trust with each other? How do we get past our own biases? And it's just not about color. It's about gender. It's about sexual orientation. I think one of the challenges, and this is hard, that I've been figuring out, and I talked to Brother Ken about this, is that sometimes the goal is to make it about race, because race is the most divisive thing in America.
Mm-hmm.
But if you take race off the table and maybe you make it about income, or you make it about gender, you just maybe you start to figure out what and who you're really fighting.
And that's why at STEM Global Action and STEM Nola, we say that we're STEM for all, but for especially low income, low resource communities. So, that race is not on the table. And if you look at our videos, you look at our delivery, we are executing in low resource, low income communities, whether it's rural Louisiana, that's mostly white, or whether it's along the Gulf Coast, that's mostly poor white people. We want to find people that otherwise don't have access and give it to them. And Frank, you're from New Orleans, and you don't know. Look, man, I'm gonna be on a high the rest of the day because you and I are on this podcast talking about this. But we are building a 42,000 square foot STEM innovation hub in a low income area in New Orleans. And people keep asking me, why you build it over there?
Mm-hmm.
And Maze said, when he made his famous album in New Orleans, they said, why make an album in New Orleans? And he said, why not? My point is, why not build where the people need the most? Yep. And I am thankful to people like the Action and Health System, like Boeing. The people have already stepped up to the table and said, we believe in the mission, we believe in the people that you're trying to serve, and we're going to back you. Now, the crazy part about it, when they asked why build over there in New Orleans East, I said, well, the reason why we're building in New Orleans East, because geographically, that put me within 1 hour of 150,000 kids in 5 different school districts. Now, they want the answer to be because I'm building it because this is where the black kids or this was
right, exactly.
But no, I'm building this because it's on the interstate, right off an exit, and it put me within 1 hour drive of 150,000 kids, and a kid can jump on the bus in the morning at their school, come here, get a lesson, and be back at their school by the end of the day. So it make theoretical, geographical, financial, all the sense in the world to put this building where we're putting it.
Yep. Now, it made complete sense. And again, your answer to that question, why you're building it, it's not about race, it's about the kids. Now, yes, if you want to look at the neighborhood, you can extrapolate that data and see what it comes down to. But you're trying to reach the most kids in that vicinity that you can reach. And I think that's just, I'm gonna tell you, when I figured out race was a social construct, and this was in my master's program, I had to go backwards for a minute. And I started asking, why? Why was it necessary to create? Why was it necessary to? Now, the impact of racism is real. So we can't deny that. We have to deal with that. You and I have dealt with that. Brother Ken has dealt with that. We have to deal with that. But the question of why is it important to divide us? Because I've been in rooms where we talk about racial equity. Some white people think that doesn't include them.
Right.
You're a race too. We talk about black people too. Like we're talking about white people, black people, brown people. We're just not equity is just not about people of color, but they have been successful at convincing people that it is, because it sustains certain power structures. But the minute we figure out that it's about all of us and how can we just care about human beings as people, things will start to change. But I think what STEM Nola is doing in New Orleans is focusing on the people. It's focusing on the people in that community. And if it's doing well with those people, I promise you, you can probably replicate that in another community where people look different, and it'll have the same or comparable success in that community. But it has to be about the people, which is about the people.
We're saying we build in a high-functioning STEM community, and a high-functioning STEM community is child-centered, adult-governed, elder-ruled. A high-functioning STEM community has strategies, standards, and structure. And our structure is one that give a place for everybody. We focus on all kids. All kids get to come to our events and participate. The adults in our community are the college kids that we pay a stipend to and we train. So we surround the K-12 kids with college students. We put over $3 million in the hands of college students in the last 9 years. Frank, this summer, we had 100 college interns. We had more college interns than a lot of corporations. Every time I looked at my payroll every 2 weeks, I'm like, you must be out your mind, Mackie. But to have those college students bright-eyed and working in the community, I mean, it was almost like a godsend. And then we surround the college students with the elder in the community. Where who are the elder in the STEM community? That's your STEM professional. That's your educator. So we call that vertical mentoring, right? So that's our standards, that's our structure, that's our strategy. And that works in every community, because once we focus on the kid and we grab the kid, we got the family. Once we got the family, now we can give the family information that otherwise can better serve them. And the reason why our model serves everybody is because now when you look at the STEM assets in the community, as we inform people about those assets that they didn't know about, now they get to go to those assets, right? Because they didn't know that the Children's Museum had this. They didn't know the World War II Museum was doing this. They didn't know Tulane was doing that. They didn't know UNO was doing that. So now we become the mouthpiece for the community, a trusted well to let them know your kid has an interest in this, go over there and tell them we sent you. We can replicate this in every community and really create a wellspring of goodwill in STEM for all communities.
And then, and you said something, right? So if we talk about a translation exercise for a minute, you talked about the elder connecting with the kids, right? I've been in rooms where there's a lot of research and a lot of conversation around the impact of mentoring and what that has on the success of a child. And funders are supporting that. And so as you're talking about your program, we think about it so easily, and it's just fluid for us that, you know, you need to have an older person here. They have the history, they have the understanding, the culture, the relationships. But when you move into philanthropy, it's mentoring. And then you talk about it in that way. And then you ask for an investment in this space of mentoring as it connects to your STEM program, as you think about it. And I think because if you don't draw that correlation, the funder might miss it. Because again, remember, a lot of funders aren't from the communities in which they're funding and they're supporting. And so in some cases, there's almost an education that has to happen about that community and about the history of that community, just so you can have that, you know, that pre-information coming in so you can make better decisions.
Frank, look, we're gonna have to let you go, but you just said a mouthful, because I just got some reviews back from a grant we wrote. And the big buzzword now is, you know, social emotional learning, right? So the review said, you know, we didn't see SEL in here. And we like, the whole grant was about SEL.
That's becoming controversial too.
Right, but our mistake was we didn't say the words SEL. I mean, the whole grant, our whole model is based on social emotional learning, connecting, you know, socially, emotionally, making sure people are whole, a holistic person. And we got dinged because we did not say the words. And what you're saying right there, right?
Yep.
Is that's absolutely true about mentoring, because mentoring became so pervasive, right? So ubiquitous. I stopped using the word mentoring because everybody considered everything that they was doing mentoring. So it's funny that you will see that, pick it out and say, hey, you got to mention the word mentoring. When I've moved on and say, you know what I'm not going to mention? Mentoring.
See, that's what I'm saying. See? Yeah, and if you say whole child development, if you say it's focusing on the whole child, translation, the science of learning and development.
But you know, and look, we got to run, but I'm an engineer, and that's been my problem. It's been a learning process for me, right? You know, I keep saying I'm going to write a book, The Education of Calvin Mackie, because I came out of a lab as an engineer doing research on fluid mechanics into this nonprofit world. You know, so it's a different language, it's a different affect, it's a different context, and it's definitely an education. And I say that to say this. Think about the people in the community who started nonprofits, who want to come to the Kellogg Foundation, other people to get funding. And Calvin Mackie, with 4 STEM degrees and a PhD, who was a college professor for 12 years, I'm saying, I don't know how the hell to get from here to there. So what about just the person out there who really want to do something? So look, Frank, let's keep working together. Keep doing what you're doing. Keep uplifting the voices that need to be uplifted. Stay in those rooms and keep fighting to make sure that equity is on the table whenever it's being discussed. And I want you to know the city of New Orleans is proud of you. And I'm going to make sure a lot of people in the city of New Orleans know what you're doing, because my whole goal, I told Ahmed the other day, my whole goal is to repatriate New Orleans. Everywhere I go, I'm finding people, and I'm going to bring them home. So you got to come home, man.
I like that. I miss them crawfish, man. I miss them crawfish.
Frank, thank you so much, Frank, for coming on. I hope you enjoyed it. I know we all have just been stimulated by the conversation. We're, as Doc said, we got to go, but you got to come back. So, please, you know the way home. So that's our show for today. Thank you all for joining us on Let's Talk STEM. Come back and see us. And in the meantime, follow us on all our social channels. Goodbye.
You've been listening to a STEM Global Action podcast. Through our STEM-based programming, we put students on the path to quality jobs in science, technology, engineering, and math. Visit us at www.stemglobalaction.com. Until next time, let's keep talking STEM.